You Know Where I Am by Allison Miller. Chapter 1. Jessie Kincaid walked to the nursing home to visit her father, Casey, every day after school, putting in her time as the dutiful daughter. This was at the behest of her mother, Corey. This was her life since she was 3 years old, spending every day, birthdays included, taking care of Dad, or in the company of medical staff. For her 15th birthday, she was given a stale cupcake and a pat on the head. No balloons, streamers, or gifts. But Jessie didn't waste her time thinking about other 15-year-olds' birthdays. It wasn't worth it to worry about someone else's life. This was her life, and she was used to it. Nurses' aides came in and gave her father fresh towels, stocked wipes, and swabbed his mouth out. Second shift was starting. "Abernathy died yesterday. We have an extra water pitcher. Do you want it?" the aide asked. Jessie knew Mrs. Abernathy's mug hadn't been touched by her dead lips recently and was washed every day, but the thought of receiving something from someone who'd been dead a day unsettled her. "No thanks." The aides took their leave of Jessie, and she took her father's tray table out to do her homework. This was Jessie's daily routine. She never knew her father the way everyone else knew him. All she ever knew was the man who screamed, drooled, and soiled himself. Jessie had the misfortune of changing her father and seeing him in the most unfavorable light any young child would ever want to see their parent in. There was a time clear in her memory of when she realized just how uncomfortable this man, who was a former shadow of himself, made her. She was 5, and her mother said, "Come give Daddy a birthday kiss." Drool escaped his mouth, and the putrid smell of his breath made her stomach churn. Unable to spit or swallow, the most the nursing staff could do for her dad was swab his mouth out with a wet sponge and wipe the dead skin away from his mouth. His teeth were decaying and his tongue white, making a stale and damp stench like water stagnating in an old pipe. He was in a facility in Rangeley, Colorado at that time. When Jessie was 6 years old, her mother was approached by Dad's doctor, who told her about a new experimental treatment being performed in Price, Utah. The memory was fuzzy, but Jessie could see the rush her mother was in to get out of their small house and into a drafty house on a slope, walking distance from both school and the nursing home. While he lived in the facility, Jessie would read to him, sing to him, and talk to him about her day at school until one day she just stopped. She realized the more time he took out of her life, the less time she had to make friends. She wanted to focus on the living, not someone slowly rotting away in a hospital bed. Only 2 years later, the place her mom was working went out of business, and Dad was eliminated from the program due to her inability to pay and his lack of progress, causing them to take him out of the facility and care for him by themselves. The expense of having an invalid in their home affected Jessie the most. She wore secondhand clothes and ate only once a day at school. Every spare penny was sunk into caring for Dad. A counselor noticed Jessie's rapid weight loss, isolation, and lack of her mother at school functions and called her to the office. Just minutes after the door closed, Jessie broke down and told her about the struggles she dealt with at home. When the school contacted Mom about her daughter's neglect, her solution was to put Dad into a state-run home. Jessie was ordered by her mother to go see him every day, bringing her to present day, sitting at her father's bedside, working on a math problem. The lights in the room dimmed. A subtle breeze infiltrated the room, settling over her father. A tingling sensation rested on Jessie's lips and crept into her scalp. She was suddenly uncomfortable and had to get out. Quickly, she gathered her stuff and went to bid her father goodbye. Clutching her messenger bag in a death grip, many thoughts entered her mind as she stood rooted in her spot, heart beating rapidly, her breath hitching in her throat. Moving forward, she said, "Dad?" Only this time, there was no groan or scream of acknowledgement. "Dad," she said again, getting closer. Placing her hand on his chest, feeling for that familiar, slow and hollow heartbeat. There was nothing. No heat. No shallow breath released in a rattle. He was gone. Jessie pushed the nurse's call button and fled the room, running out of the facility, unperceived by anyone. The nursing staff waited for a long time to call Jessie's mom. Mom had just set foot in the door when the phone rang. Jessie heard both sides of the conversation. They apparently disregarded her call light, assuming she accidentally pressed it while readjusting her dad. Mom crumbled to the floor in tears, wailing about how unfair it was. Jessie hadn't cried yet, and secretly wondered how her mother could be surprised that this day had finally come. Surely she'd spent the last years preparing herself for the inevitable, just as Jessie had. She was too pissed. pissed that the nurses never went in and saw what the light was about, and pissed that they let him grow cold. She wasn't good at comforting people. However, she knelt and rubbed her mother's arm and stroked her hair. Together, they sat on the floor and cried. Dad's room was cleaned out and had a new resident in it before Jessie went to school the next day. At the end of her father's life, all he had left to show for it were a bunch of tattered clothes, pink hangers, and books the activity aides read to him. His was a life that would be remembered by 3 people outside this facility. Jessie, her mom, and Dad's mother, wherever she was. They buried him in Dinosaur, Colorado, the place he was born, the place he grew up, and the place he pulled out in front of a car, changing his life forever. Mom was in the car that night. Somehow, she came away with no injuries. Jessie was only 3 years old at the time and was left with a friend that night. Both Mom and Dad were estranged from their parents, and the tragic car accident did little to reunite them. Mom and Jessie were left to care for a disabled Dad by themselves. Jessie looked around at her father's funeral. Aside from her and her mother, no other relatives were in attendance. There was the administrator of the nursing home and the 4 aides who'd cared for him. Mom cried uncontrollably, saying she'd miss him every day. Jessie would miss her father, but her tears came for different reasons. If he were as loved as Mom said, where were all of his friends? Dad had been dead a month. Without having him as the subject of their every conversation, Jessie and Mom had nothing to say. He was gone, and there was no need for Mom to work 2 jobs anymore. No need for Jessie to rush to the nursing home after school, and no reason for them to hang on to any of the stuff they'd accrued in the time they'd cared for him at home. Looking into the living room during a painfully quiet dinner, Jessie fixated on her father's motorized wheelchair and his hospital bed, wondering why they were still taking up space in their home. "How do you feel about it?" Mom asked, pulling Jessie out of her trance. Sorry, what?" she asked. "Moving somewhere else." "I don't know. I hadn't thought of it," Jessie said, wondering why her mom would come up with an idea like this out of the blue. Touching her face, Mom said, "Both of us need to carry on with our lives." "Where would we go?" "Anywhere. Casey and I always said we would pool all the money we had together, take all the food out of the fridge, and just go until we ran out of gas and money, spending no more than $10 a day at convenience stores on food. Maybe I can do that with you." Jessie was a bit more level-headed than her spontaneous mother. "That sounds a bit irresponsible. Maybe we should pick a place and make definitive plans, rather than just get in a car and drive." "Jessie, I'm not sure my credit will allow us to buy a house," her mother quietly admitted. "Can we afford an apartment?" Mom's face lit up with an idea. "Let's go somewhere during the summer, and I'll put the house on the market. If it sells, we'll move then." This plan sounded just as bad as the gas station junk food plan. "I'll look up a place and we can move there," Mom continued. Jessie took her dish to the sink and went to her room. It seemed her mother was going to do what she wanted, with or without her consent. Reflecting on her past, Jessie concluded that her life wasn't too terrible. She always had food and a place to stay. Corey never raised her hands to her, but there were still things that were missing. She didn't want extravagant gifts or a parent that would always fawn over her, but somewhere in the middle would be nice. Jessie wanted to share more than mint green eyes, blonde hair, and long legs in common with her mom. The only thing that she got from her dad was a face full of freckles. Perhaps agreeing to move would put them both on the right path to a relationship they never had. Over the next few months, Corey became that somewhere-in-the-middle parent, asking about her day, taking her on after-school drives, and talking about moving to another state to live. There was more time now that Dad was gone. Friday night quickly became movie night. One week, Jessie would choose. The next, Mom would. For the first time in their life together, conversation didn't revolve around Dad. They'd even snuck up to Latuda, an old ghost town outside of Price, and waited until it was dark to check out a legend of a local ghost story. Sitting on top of an old structure that looked like a large water tank, they spread out a blanket and watched the moon come up. "So, have you thought about where you want to live?" Jessie's heart sank. This summer was so much fun. Jessie worried that the stress of another move would cause all this to end, and Mom would go back to being emotionally distant. "I haven't thought about it," Jessie admitted. "I think I found a place. I know it seems whimsical and impulsive, but I think Lake in Kansas would be perfect for us." It was a full moon tonight, and Jessie could see her mom's eyes light up at the prospect of uprooting her again and moving to a place she had never heard of. Hoping to stop the thought before it grew legs, Jessie said, "We can visit, try the place out for a while, and if it doesn't work out, we can always move back here." Mom sat up and took Jessie's hands in hers. "I think it's meant to be." Jessie pressed her lips together. Her mom's thought grew legs, and she was running with it. "This place is a new place with no memories of him. We will be strangers, and people won't judge us. I'll no longer be the stupid woman who kept someone alive that didn't deserve it." Jessie had no idea people said that about her mom. She was still unsure about the possibility of moving to another place. How long would it take to repair her mother's credit and get into a house? What if their house and Price sold before they were able to buy a house there? Jessie's questions were answered when her mother did a short sale on the house, sold almost everything they owned, and put the remainder of their belongings in the back of her old Mercury car. Jessie wished she had an old doll to hug, or something to remind her of her childhood. But that was all gone.